This has been co-sponsored by Social Justice under Mary Lardner, the Shelter Rock Forum under Victor White, and Adult Programs under Bob Nuxel. We want to thank everybody who's made this possible. After our panel and discussion, we will go into the art gallery where you can have refreshments and an informal reception. Our moderator for tonight is Long Island Lisa Tyson, Director of the Long Island Progressive Coalition. Welcome, Lisa.
And thank you, Elaine. We really are excited to be here today. The Long Island Progressive Coalition has a long history working on trade agreements, or working against trade agreements, which is more the case. And a lot of people, I'm so happy you're all here, because a lot of people think that this is not important, and they don't know about it. And trade agreements really affect all of our lives every day. It affects the lives of people in all countries across the world. And it's very significant and severe what happens through these trade agreements. And too often, people are willing to make a call on Syria and those big hot-button issues, but it's the trade issues that our elected officials don't think we care about, they don't think we understand. So thank you so much for coming today. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of background on what the Trans-Pacific Partnership is. How many people here have heard of it before? Wow, that's great. I'm just going to give you a little brief understanding of it for those of you who don't know. It is a massive new international trade pact being pushed by the U.S. government and at the behest of transnational corporations. The TPP is already being negotiated between the United States, Australia, Brunei, Canada, Chile, Japan, Malaysia, Mexico, New Zealand, Peru, Singapore, and Vietnam. Just among those countries, it would be the largest free trade agreement in the U.S. history, covering approximately 40% of the global economy. But the TPP is also specifically intended as a docking agreement that the other Pacific Rim countries would join over time, with Thailand and the Philippines, South Korea, and others already expressing interest. So today, the panel of experts are really going to be talking about how this impacts our different issues. What we do know of what corporations want out of the TPP, they want cheap labor costs, special powers to attack environmental laws, longer drug patents, further financial deregulation, caps on food safety precautions, concentration of global food supplies, dismantling the buy local preferences, and lower taxes. Who would have guessed corporations want lower taxes? So we have a timekeeper. That's Dan. Why don't you just raise your hand? So for the speakers, he'll be telling you when you're about ready to end your time. We want to make sure that we get to questions and answers. So each speaker is going to speak for approximately 10 minutes or so. And then at the end, we open to you to have question and answers. We want you to hold off your questions until the end. After we have question and answer, we want to make sure that we have time to talk strategy. We've had some really exciting organizing by a coalition of groups on Long Island who have been able to get our local Congress people to really make very strong statements on this. We want to talk about that, and really, it's all about what you can do to make sure that we stop this. So our first speaker is Alex Bouchant, who's the Northeast Regional Director of Food and Water Watch. Based in the Brooklyn office, Alex oversees all organizing efforts in New York and the Northeast. Alex has worked on issues related to fracking, factory farms, genetic engineering, and water privatization at the Food and Water Watch since 2009. His background is in legislative campaigning and community and electoral organizing. Thank you for joining us.
I want to thank the church here and Lisa and everyone for bringing me here and actually for holding this meeting. I think this is the exact kind of issue that at Food and Water Watch we often are talking about and saying, God, if there was just a way we could organize around this, if there's a way to motivate people around it, it would be really fantastic, because this is really the root cause of so many of the problems. And I think the TPP is finally becoming that. You know, having this meeting on Long Island, there's so much exciting organizing going on across New York and I'm sure around the country as well. I think it's just incredibly exciting and really, really incredibly encouraging to see this many people on Long Island to what's, you know, if you ask a person on the street, they probably don't know what the TPP is. And so I think it's fantastic that there are so many folks here today. So what I want to mostly concentrate on is to talk a little bit about what impact this would have on our real lives, right? So there's sort of this overarching thing that people kind of get means more power for corporations and it's scary. But I think it's often hard to make the connection of like, what does this mean, you know, for my normal everyday life and how is this really going to impact, you know, normal people? And so the TPP really, really is going to do that. And I think one of the really frightening things about it is when you look at it, people are talking about it as a trade agreement, yet really 5 of the 29 chapters deal directly with trade, and the rest don't, which is nuts. So we're talking about not just a trade agreement, but really a permanent power grab by corporations, and we simply can't, at this moment especially, allow the U.S. or the world really to cede yet more of our democracy to corporations. And so I think really there's quite a bit at stake here. So I want to start with, I guess this is sort of a wonky, boring topic, but one key provision in this that's I think incredibly important to Food and Water Watch's work, and I think to a lot of the work going on in New York right now, is this concept of investor-state equivalency. So what this means, this is already happening under current trade agreements, but it allows investors, it allows corporations to sue state, federal, or local government over things that they say are costing them profit, right? And this isn't just sort of a scary theoretical thing, this is something that's happening right now. So last year, a company, US-based company, that wants to frack for oil and natural gas in a Quebec town, sued that Quebec town for $250 million because the town has a moratorium on fracking. And that is scary not only because it means that under NAFTA this could happen again and again, but once you open this up to many other countries around the world, it's obviously going to keep happening. This has real implications for somewhere like New York, where, you know, luckily, I think due to the hard work of lots of folks in this room and out of this room as well, we've kept fracking out in New York State, and Governor Cuomo still hasn't decided what to do. But in the meantime, the other very encouraging thing that happened is a bunch of towns and municipalities in New York and out of New York, across the country and across the world, have said, we're not going to allow this. We think it's inherently unsafe, and we're not going to do it in our town. The TPP and trade agreements like it cut directly through all of that, right, and say, look, you guys don't have the right to do it. We're going to just do it anyway. And so this is part of a much larger trend that's happening, not just on fracking, but on all of the issues that we work on. This has happened on years and years ago, decades ago actually. This already happened on factory farms to the point where there's a handful of states in the country that can actually deal with factory farms on a local level, which is incredibly important, right? No one wants a hog farm with 20,000 hogs next to them. And you used to be able to stop it, right? I mean, that's one of the big untold stories. People talk about factory farms and this recent invention. One of the key things that happened is you can't organize around that stuff anymore because you basically can't stop it locally, except in somewhere like Missouri, where we've held on to local control for a long time. So that kind of thing is going to happen to fracking too if we let things like this happen. But, you know, there are other implications for fracking as well. So one of them is this liquefied natural gas. So people often say LNG. It's become a hot issue on Long Island, as I'm sure many of you know, because there's this proposed terminal just off the coast. So if TPP goes forward, there's going to be huge, huge demand for liquid natural gas, and there's already going to be. But because one of the recent, towards the end of the process, Japan was added to the TPP, or if it went through, it would be added to it, right? Japan already buys a third of the liquefied natural gas because they don't have a lot of domestic energy. So you're going to see huge, huge demand, but more than just demand, you're going to see the same investor-state equivalency come up over and over and over again on the liquefied natural gas, on the fracking at the source, but also, importantly, right now, to approve an LNG export terminal. So there are very few of these in the U.S. right now, which is part of the reason that natural gas prices are so low. But right now, the DOE has to look at the whole thing and decide, yes, this is in the U.S. national interest. We're going to approve this. We're going to build this. I don't have a whole lot of confidence in the Department of Energy anyway, but at least there is a process right now, right? They have to look at it. They have to say yes or no. That goes away when you start entering into agreements like this. And so you're going to see pressure not only at the source of fracking, but you're also going to see pressure to export it. And that matters if you're worried about fracking, right? Because it means there's going to be more demand, and we're going to drill for more and more gas, and we're going to see more and more of the negative effects of fracking. Not just the water contamination that everyone thinks of, but the air pollution, the truck traffic, the social costs, all of that. But even if you don't care about all that stuff, which you should, but if you don't, once you export this stuff, it's going to matter to every American who pays an energy bill. So the energy loves to talk about how natural gas is cheap and plentiful and abundant and American. But really, it's not going to be any of those things, right? Because what they want to do is not produce domestic energy for us at low costs. What they want to do is ship it around the world, and particularly ship it to the developing world, which has growing energy needs for much, much higher prices. And that as soon as our natural gas is on the global market, that cheap natural gas doesn't exist. And we know it doesn't because it already doesn't around the world. It only does in America because of something of a closed market. So I feel like I talked a little bit too much about fracking, which is always my problem. But this has broader implications for our food policy as well, which is the other thing we care about. But I think also just for this whole issue of our ability to govern ourselves, right? So right now there's a growing movement around the country to label genetically engineered food. So this is an issue in New York. In fact, if you're interested in it, I'd love to talk about it. Where we're trying to pass a bill here in New York this session. But the issue has really exploded, right? So there was a failed ballot initiative in California last year. This year after that, there were 30-something states that had bills that were introduced. 2 of them passed bills, Connecticut and Maine, both of which have trigger clauses that I won't go into, but essentially it means other states have to pass it for it to go into effect. But the movement is growing, right? The movement is growing. One of these states is going to pass it relatively soon, and it will have enormous implications for the food system. People think that European countries have banned GMOs. Some of them have, but what really happened is almost all of them made them label it, right? And as soon as it's labeled, the food companies know this, and I think most people know it. You're not going to choose the genetically engineered one if it's sitting right next to something that's not, and the price difference is not much. And that's exactly what will happen as soon as we can label it. So there's a ballot issue in Washington this year. There's a bunch of states that are working on it, including here in New York, where we're pushing it very, very aggressively. So one of these states is going to do it, right? But again, the same exact issue, the same investor-state equivalency thing is going to come up if we pass the TPP. And it will come up because the food companies are absolutely going to sue on that. They're already threatening to sue. We're already dealing with this just under domestic law that has nothing to do with trade issues. As soon as you give them one more avenue, they're absolutely going to do it. And both with this and with fracking, the issue isn't just the lawsuits, right? It's not just that they'll win some of those lawsuits and they'll lose some of those lawsuits, but it's the chilling effect, right? So if you're a local government, or even a state government, and you think, well, we could pass this, and people are organizing around it, and it seems like they want to, but we know we're going to be involved in a lawsuit that costs hundreds of millions of dollars with Monsanto, they won't do it, and we'll see them stop. And that's why they put the trigger clause in the Connecticut's bill. That's why they did it in Maine, and that's why Vermont, for the last 3 years, has stopped it at the very last point. They're all terrified of getting sued by Monsanto, and they basically want a state like New York to pick up the legal bill. So the point of this is not to talk bad about our friends from New England, but rather that they don't just have to win the lawsuits, right? They just have to threaten it. And you're going to have a chilling effect that really discourages us from being able to do anything positive around genetic engineering, around fracking, around so many issues that Food and Water Watch works on and that all of the folks up here work on and that many of you do. So I think for those reasons, it's really important to kill this because, I care about those issues because it's what I work on and sort of like consumes my everyday life. But I think more fundamentally than that, we've got to start asking ourselves what the purpose of this democracy is, right? So obviously all these trade agreements have huge consequences for what happens at the national level and what sovereign countries can do, right? Like what we can do to govern ourselves and what we allow corporations to do. But it goes much deeper than that at a level that I don't think most of us think about. This goes all the way to the local town board level where we're talking about, well, can this town actually govern itself? I think the answer clearly should be yes, and we are all smart adults. We can figure out what we want to accomplish in our given communities. But corporations are trying aggressively to take all of that away. They've been trying for years, and the TPP is just one more way to do it. So that's why I'm excited to see everybody and excited to work on stopping this thing in the short term, stopping the fast track. And I think I'm out of time, so I'm going to stop.
Thank you, Alice. I mean, it's just such an important concept, safe food and water. And it just horrifies me personally to think that it's at risk. And this agreement really will determine what kind of safety we have in this country. So our next speaker is Roger Clayman. Roger Clayman is the Executive Director of the Long Island Federation of Labor. I'm very lucky to be able to work with Roger on a regular basis on many issues. He is a strong labor leader on Long Island. The local federation is a voice for 250,000 union members and their families in both Nassau and Suffolk counties. Roger came to the Federation after a 30-year career with the National AFL-CIO, so he has a long history in labor organizing. And the Federation's primary efforts include seeking to gain good jobs and housing in local communities, rebuilding Long Island's infrastructure, and providing leadership and training to the next generation of union leaders. And really, when we think about TPP, really one of the first issues that come into my mind is labor. Good wages, health care, and those things. So Roger's going to address those issues for us.
Thank you, Lisa. Well, I'm glad that Alex went into some of the issues about sovereignty. It's probably the key word to remember after tonight, when all the facts and statistics are forgotten. Sovereignty may be the one word we want to remember, because that's what we stand to lose. We know a little bit about how these tribunals will work, because we've been bringing labor complaints to these international tribunals that are set up with each one of the treaties that's starting with NAFTA and then to the Central American and the Korean trade agreement. The tribunals deal with complaints about workers getting hurt, and the countries taking away their rights to organize and their rights to take effective action to try to raise the wages and living conditions within their countries. And I think that it's clear that in so many ways, with what we eat and drink, with the medicines that we get, and with the standards that a labor movement tries to establish through collective bargaining, that this is part of the greater play by the international, multinational corporation to drive it all down. And we were able to look at this in terms of our own economy and get a clearer picture of it. I just got back from the AFL-CIO convention, and we talked a lot about the concept of shared prosperity. How can we build a model in this country where people can survive, can become prosperous, can stay in the middle class, when so much of the middle class is now being hollowed out and people are falling out of it, which has a very strong correlation to the loss of American manufacturing jobs, which ties us right back into trade agreements, which is exactly what the trade agreements have done, has taken our jobs and shipped them overseas. So as we know that shared prosperity has to be built on growth and investment in our country and in every country, and that's exactly what we're not getting in terms of economic policy in this country. We're getting austerity economics. It has to be built on security, economic personal security, and that's exactly what we're not getting, because as the legal system crumbles and erodes, particularly the labor laws, employers are strengthened and are able to drive workers out of unions and prevent unions from being organized. So unions, which are a force for preserving the middle class and for progressive policies in most areas of our economy and our lives, are being pushed out of existence. We need democracy. That's what we've always kind of lectured about, democracy being necessary to to develop freedom of association among workers overseas, because we were always in a better position to say that because we thought we had it after World War II. Our labor movement was at its strongest. Since that time, because for reasons that we ought to identify, we've lost it. The labor movement has shrunk in numbers. Our ability to win organizing campaigns is practically down to nothing in the private sector, and it's because the corporations have found a way to make us a lot more like our Asian, African, and European brothers and sisters who in many cases find it almost impossible to organize, and in many cases illegal, and in some parts of the world they're losing their lives over trying to organize. So I just wanted to give a brief summary of how we got here with trade agreements. When I first went to work for the AFL-CIO, we used to talk about the Burke-Hartke law. Anybody remember that? Anybody want to admit they're as old as me? No, yeah, I didn't think so. Burke-Hartke was about trade. It was about tariffs. How did we stop Americans from losing jobs? How did we protect our jobs? Was by putting tariffs so that imports wouldn't come in and take them. And that was the belief, and that was the system at the time. Things have fully evolved since then to where we've practically lost our whole manufacturing base. We don't talk about tariffs anymore. Now we talk about sovereignty. And we can't legislate that you can only bring in so many goods and services through imports. And by the way, these are being brought in by whom? They're being brought in by American corporations that became multinational corporations that have no loyalty to any borders, but produce where it can be done most cheaply and bring them in. Well, just like keeping clean water and clean food, that's now would be a prohibited unfair trade practice, and there would be an action brought before the World Trade Organization to enact tariffs. But we lived under that system for a long time. It was called GATT, General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade. You may have heard a little bit about it. This whole system begun to unravel with NAFTA. NAFTA, North American Free Trade Agreement, really did an awful lot it was sold to us as a way of preventing cross-border problems with Mexico, a flood of immigrants, and as something that would stabilize the economy on both sides of the border. Well, I don't think there's anybody here that would think that that's what happened. In fact, it destroyed the economy in Mexico. It drove farmers off the farm by allowing the import of all the American corn. It made illegal the practice of having subsidized agriculture and having subsidized tortillas, so that people could eat. And so the farms collapsed, and you had a flood of people with nowhere to go and no income to add. They went into the cities, to the Maquiladora region, some to produce goods to ship across the border, but many of them came to the United States, and just as undocumented workers. Between 1985 and 1989, approximately 80,000 undocumented immigrants came to the U.S. From Mexico annually. And just to show how foolish it was, what these three presidents, Carter, Bush, and Clinton told us, between 1990 and 1994, 260,000 came across, and then 95 to 99, 400,000 annually, and then it grew to 485,000. So it didn't accomplish that at all. Quickly, I'll run through some of these agreements. After NAFTA, there was a Central American Free Trade Agreement, and there the worker protections are even weaker than they were under NAFTA. There's a complaint on Guatemala that's filed by the AFL-CIO and 6 unions there, which is still pending after 5 years. And the government there refuses to agree to a labor action plan to address the violations cited in the complaint. And there are a lot of examples like that, but that's so typical of what goes on and how the system now is construed in these trade agreements doesn't work. On the Korean trade deal anniversary, first year recently, imports jumped $2 billion in value for passenger vehicles. 5,000 Americans' jobs were lost for each $1 billion of trade. So it means that in itself, in 1 year, 10,000 jobs were lost. And it has what was in it a weak rule of origin, which is you can get into these things in the trade agreement, but what happens is it's not trade between just Korea and the United States, and it won't be that way in the future. It'll be parts made in another country, perhaps Vietnam, perhaps China, shipped to Korea, probably not China because they don't ship to Korea to come here, and then assembled and shipped to the United States under that free trade agreement. So that's how those things work, and that's how the products get in. There's the China situation is our world trade deficit was $737 billion last year, and over half of it, or approximately half of it, was with China. China has policies that are, they give subsidies to their corporations so they can dump products on the market, and they manipulate currency. And we can get into that, what currency means later. That's kind of complicated. But when your currency is overvalued, as ours is relative to theirs, that means their imports are much cheaper. NAFTA cost us 700,000 jobs. Since China entered the World Trade Organization, the U.S. has lost 2.7 million jobs. So, you know, that just this bringing them into the WTO has made that much difference. I'll stop with that. There are so many things we could look at Panama, we can look at Colombia. I think people don't realize there's been a strike going on in Colombia, 200,000 farmers, you know, who have taken to the streets to fight against the policies that we saw going on in Mexico. And this is a country where almost 3,000 trade unionists have been killed in the last 10 years trying to organize. It's the most unsafe place in the world to be a trade unionist. So this is a little snippet of this from the labor side. And the Trans-Pacific Partnership will take all of these bad experiences and make them more intense with less protection and less ability to address them.
Thank you, Roger. That was really informative. I think, in doing this work, I get to speak with brilliant people like Roger and the other panelists, and I also like to have conversations with my family and friends who are not into this world, involved as we are, reading about all of it. But what I do know that the average person understands is that these trade agreements have not benefited them. And they've lost their jobs. There's no manufacturing anymore. We used to have some great jobs in Long Island. They're in other countries. And they don't like to speak with people in India when they have a problem and they're calling the call center. I mean, these are just like general feelings the average people are feeling. And we have to figure out how do we mobilize those people to really stop this next trade agreement. So thank you so much, Roger. Our next speaker is Pete Dolak, who's an activist, writer, poet, and photographer who organizes with Trade Justice New York Metro in opposition to the TPP. He also writes the Systemic Disorder blog, which publishes essays on the economic crisis, decoding dominant ideologies and creating a better world. Pete is the author of It's Not Over, a book analyzing the theory and practice of the 20th century's experiments in socialism. Thank you.
Okay, hello. Good to see such a nice crowd out here. You really can't overstate how important this is. There's two phrases that you'll hear. NAFTA on steroids and the scariest trade agreement you've never heard of. Of course, almost everybody in the room raised your hand, so it's good everyone has actually heard of this. But if you haven't heard of it, there's a good reason for it, because the Obama administration has tried very hard to make sure you don't know about this. This has actually been going on for 3 years now, and it's only in the past year we're really getting ourselves up to speed on just what this is all about. NAFTA on steroids, what does that mean? What that means is NAFTA is the base. This is the starting point. And as harsh as NAFTA is, as one-sided, as a corporate takeover, as an anti-democratic initiative as NAFTA is, the Trans-Pacific Partnership is going to be considerably worse. Right? NAFTA on steroids. You roll that around your head a little bit there. Now, some of our folks here, our speakers, have been talking about sovereignty. So I'm going to steer us back to that word. Right? Why is our sovereignty? The United States is the most powerful country on the world. Who is threatening our sovereignty? Of course, the threat comes from the interior. It comes from our corporations, because what this is about, as the other speakers have already been explaining, that this is a corporate power grab. This really isn't about trade. This is about a power grab. Now, if this goes through, the highest duty of a national government, not just the U.S., but all the other countries that are going to be in this, is going to be to guarantee the highest amount of corporate profits, and that is going to be codified in law. Now, that sounds pretty incredible, but that's really what's happening here, because what happens is when a government signs on to these trade agreements, the text of these trade agreements now become your own national law. They actually get written into the law. So, what is in these things? Now, we don't know that much of the text. The little bits and pieces that have been linked are very scary about it, but there's a lot of things on this that are even beyond what you see in NAFTA. For instance, any investor will be eligible to sue any participating government in there. And who is an investor? Well, the problem is there really is no limit on who is an investor. An investor is not simply a corporation that already has an operation going on, and what? You mean we can't dump our toxic waste directly into the river? Well, that's unfair. You're hurting our profits. It's not only that kind of corporation. It's a corporation that's thinking about making an investment. Has proposed. We think we would like to make an investment. And there's a regulation here that we don't think we're going to be able to get the maximum profit we were expecting from that. You have to get rid of that. They are eligible to sue because they are an investor. Okay. Now, how does this work? Now, there are 3 international arbitration boards, and the one to keep in mind here is a body called ICSID, I-C-S-I-D, ICSID. And it has a long convoluted name, which I can never remember, so I have to keep it in front of me. It is the International Center for Settlement of Investor Disputes. It sounds pretty neutral, but what that is when an investor sues under NAFTA or the U.S.-Panama Free Trade Agreement or the Australia-Hong Kong Free Trade Agreement or any of these there's a whole lot of these bilateral agreements going around, and also some of these regional ones such as NAFTA. And what they do is they don't sue in the regular courts. They get their own little special setup. And these are the arbitration boards. So there's one called the London Board of Arbitration. There's the ICSID. There's also a third one out there whose name always escapes me. Now, ICSID is the one to keep in mind. I-C-S-I-D. And keep those 5 little not-so-benign letters in mind. So what happens with this is each government that signs on to use these arbitration bodies as the dispute mechanism, as they call it. They always have this very neutral sound language. It sounds so benign. And what they do is each participating government then appoints judges. And the United States, we're a big country, so we get to appoint more judges than other countries. So the U.S. appoints 8 judges to the ICSID. And then they have a draw, and they pick out of these. Now, every one of these is a corporate lawyer. Well, 7 out of the 8 are corporate lawyers who specialize in representing corporations in disputes against governments. And the 8th one, the only one who isn't a corporate lawyer, is a trade lobbyist who works for an international business organization that specializes in lobbying for these trade agreements. These are the independent arbitrators who get to decide these cases. So it's no wonder that almost invariably the corporation wins these things, and the government, i.e. we, the taxpayers, are on the hook for many, many millions of dollars. Literally hundreds of millions of dollars have been awarded on there. The cases sometimes or really egregious. Now here's an example. Australia and Hong Kong have a free trade agreement, and it goes to one of these arbitration bodies. Now, Australia has very stringent tobacco rules, more stringent than we have here in the United States. So Philip Morris decided, well, we don't really like that. This is discouraging people from smoking. Obviously, if you're a tobacco company, you've got a problem. Your customers keep dying. You have to get more. So what did they do? Therefore, if you're a Hong Kong company, you can also sue Australia. Well, Philip Morris is not a Hong Kong country. So what did they do? They moved some of their assets in the Asia-Pacific region, moved it to Hong Kong, and it says, we're a Hong Kong country. And they now are suing Australia. Even though they first sued in the Australia regular court system, went all the way up to the Australia Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court of Australia said, you're kidding me. No, you have no case. Go. So now they're trying to do this through the back door. We alluded to a case here just earlier this year. There's a U.S., actually a Canadian company called Lone Pine. They want to do some fracking in the province of Quebec, Canada. Problem is they're a Canadian company and you can't sue your own government. But they had already solved this problem because Delaware, of course, as some of you know, is our very own offshore corporate haven. So Lone Pine, despite being a Canadian company and headquartered probably in Calgary, because that's where the oil companies in Canada tend to be located. Alberta is the Texas of Canada. But they're formally incorporated in the state of Delaware, which just means basically they have a mailbox there. And but because they're formally in Delaware, that means they're now a U.S. company, and they can now sue Canada and says, well, we want to frack. How dare you stop us? And now that's wending its way. It's wending its way through there. So there's all kinds of unbelievable cases like this going on. For instance, the Ethel Corporation. They make MTBE. Folks out here all drive, so you know that's the gasoline additive. Has a bad habit of seeping into groundwater and ruining the groundwater. So it was banned in the United States. Canada hadn't quite gotten to doing that yet. So Ethel Corporation, which is based in California, was sending their MTB up north to Canada, and Canada decided to, well, no, we're going to ban this too. So then Ethel sued under NAFTA, the provisions of NAFTA, in the ICSID, and they sued Canada, and lo and behold, the arbitrators decided, oh, that's a change of business conditions. You can't have that. So Canada had to rescind its ban on MTBE, issue an apology, amazingly enough, and pay Ethel something like $19 million because that was the value of their lost profits from this terrible regulation. So this is the kind of thing that's going to go on and get even worse because there's some little bit of restrictions. And now there won't be. So how do these arbitration bodies work? It goes into these secret tribunals, and it's all done in secret. There's been more than 200 cases heard by ICSID. Exactly 2 have been open to the public. So nobody even knows when these things go in. They do this in secret. They hand down their decision, and then they go back to the corporate law firm and continue their practice of representing them. Each of the ones, apparently, these people get elected to long terms because all of the 8 representatives appointed to this arbitration body by the U.S. all are Republican Party connections, so they obviously were all appointed by Bush too. I'm not really confident whenever their term comes up that Obama is necessarily going to put in any better. So remember, all the harshest rules that are going in on this are all being pushed by the Obama administration. Among the things that will be illegal are financial regulations. You want to now regulate derivatives and all this kind of stuff that caused our ongoing financial crisis? You can't do it. One of the things specifically the Obama administration is pointing to is they want to make that discounted bonds will be paid off. Now, companies or governments, of course, are in debt because, rich people would rather loan money than actually pay taxes. For them, it's a good deal. So you can kind of understand from their point of view. From our point of view, not so good. So what they do is a lot of times when the governments just decide, like Greece, they say, well, we're just too much debt, we can't pay this back, and they just cut a deal to pay back only a portion of it. So a lot of times the original holders of these bonds sell it off to some speculator and, get 50 cents on the dollar and get what they can and cut their losses. If TPP goes through, the speculator, a hedge fund or somebody like that who just wheels and deals and doesn't do anything productive, they can now go to the government, even though they bought this stuff at a discount, and say, you owe us on face value. And the government will be required to pay off the speculator at face value, even though it was paid off at a discount, because that would be a financial regulation. So my time is up. Just exit. Keep that in mind. This is really scary stuff. This is, corporate profits codified in law will be the highest duty of a government. Labor, safety, all that stuff, out the window.
I remember walking, at Occupy Wall Street, and there was a chant, "This is what democracy looks like." And really, what Pete was talking about is not what democracy looks like, and that's why it's such an important issue. I mean, each speaker makes me want to do more and more to stop this agreement. Our next speaker is Jennifer Reed. She is a U.S.-based researcher for Doctors Without Borders, Medicine Sans Frontiers Access Campaign. MSF is an independent international medical humanitarian organization that delivers medical care to people affected by armed conflicts, epidemics, natural disasters, and exclusion from healthcare in 70 countries. In support of MSF's work, the Access Campaign researches and advocates for sustainable solutions to lower prices of existing medical technologies, to stimulate medical research and development for diseases that primarily affect developing countries and low-income populations, and to overcome barriers to access. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you. My name is Jennifer Reed, and I'm the researcher for Doctors Without Borders Access Campaign. So first of all, thank you very much to our event hosts and organizers tonight for bringing everyone together and giving us an opportunity to speak more about these issues. And thank you to the other panelists. I'm very much enjoying learning more about the other chapters, getting out of just the access to medicine focus. And thank you to everyone here tonight. It's very encouraging to see that people are paying attention to these issues and care about public interest in trade agreements. So what I'd like to speak about tonight is the role that the TPP could have in restricting access to medicine. And putting it into a bit of context, as you heard, Doctors Without Borders is a medical humanitarian aid organization providing treatment to patients all over the world. And in order to fulfill their missions, MSF relies on quality, affordable medicine. So the Access Campaign supports this work by advocating for lower costs of medical technologies like medicines, vaccines, diagnostic tests, through competition and to ensure that patents are not a barrier to access, and pushing back against trade deals that threaten to restrict this access. So Doctors Without Borders patents, it's a bit of a stretch, but it's not intuitive, maybe, but patents and other intellectual property barriers keep medicine prices high. And in developing countries, such as where Doctors Without Borders works, people are paying out of pocket. There's often limited or no health insurance, and the price of medicines is the difference of life and death, your ability to pay out of pocket. So removing these IP barriers and fostering generic competition, which has proven to be the best way to reduce prices and drive down costs of medical treatments and technologies, is an important part of ensuring sustainable treatment options for patients around the world. So as an example of how generic competition is important for access to medicines, we look to antiretroviral treatment for HIV and AIDS. First-line treatment started out at over $10,000 per patient per year. MSF started treating HIV/AIDS with antiretrovirals in 2000, and the price was over $10,000. Through generic competition, over the span of about a decade, that price dropped by 99%. And now MSF pays about $140 per patient per year. And MSF's not alone. PEPFAR, U.S.-funded PEPFAR, sources 98% of their antiretrovirals from generic manufacturers. And the switch to generic suppliers has resulted in hundreds of millions of dollars of cost savings for PEPFAR. And it's not just PEPFAR. Global Fund, UNICEF, UNITAID, many major international treatment providers rely on quality, affordable generics and prices driven down by generic competition. When you look to second-line treatment and salvage regimens for antiretrovirals, you can see the difference. Second-line treatments are more than 2 times the cost of first-line treatments, and there's a growing need for second-line treatments for patients as resistance develops and as patients are on treatment for longer. Looking at the newest medicines, the price is starting at 14 times higher. So right now, the lowest price for a third-line regimen is $2,000 as compared to under $140 on the first-line treatment. So tying this back to the TPP, leaked text, and this is all, as we've heard, in secret. Based on the leaked text from the intellectual property chapter, we can see that there are many provisions that will threaten to seriously restrict generic competition and accessible pricing for medicine. So MSF is concerned about the public health implications of the intellectual property provisions. That this is being billed as a model for future trade agreements is doubly concerning. This trade agreement is being negotiated with developed and developing countries, and it sets up a standard that these trade terms could be applied to other developing countries where MSF works. And these policies, when taken together, represent the most restrictive and harmful for access to medicine ever seen in a trade agreement, and certainly in a trade agreement with developing countries. It rolls back internationally agreed upon public health safeguards already enshrined in multilateral agreements, in the current standard of the TRIPS agreement, and numerous other commitments by the U.S. and by other negotiating countries. So I'm going to highlight a few examples. We heard about investor-state dispute settlements. Another case that's happening right now is Eli Lilly has just initiated a lawsuit against Canada for their patent laws and loss of profit in that case. Another example is the TPP proposal would prohibit pre-grant opposition. And a pre-grant opposition to a patent application is any challenge by a third party to a patent before it has been awarded. Every country has a patent law and patent system, and they have the flexibility to apply that law as suited to their national context and their interests. And a public health safeguard that is important in many countries is a pre-grant opposition that allows the expertise of third parties to challenge the patents, allows patent offices to benefit from that third-party expertise in assessing the merits of the patents, and is much far less expensive and cumbersome than a challenge and instigating litigation after a patent has been granted. This safeguard would be eliminated in the Trans-Pacific Partnership if it were adopted as the leaked text, if all of the leaked texts are adopted as is. So when second-line regimens are about twice as expensive as first-line regimens for HIV drugs, those prices have come down thanks in large part to generic competition, which has been secured through measures like pre-grant oppositions on key second-line antiretroviral drugs. So it's not a given that all patents granted are warranted, and having the opportunity to oppose those patents before the grant has been issued reduces the likelihood delays in access if you have to go through the longer process of opposing a patent after the award. All that time is time that the prices are still high and out of reach. So another example of a provision that would restrict access to medicines, if adopted, is patent term extension. And every country that is a WTO signatory, which is all the countries in the TPP negotiations, have a 20-year patent term, including for pharmaceutical products. But the TPP would mandate a minimum of a 5-year patent term extension to compensate for regulatory delays. And those 5 years are an additional 5 years of restricted access again. And the sooner generic competition is available, the sooner the prices come down and enable treatment for affordability of treatment for international medical treatment providers like MSF. So we're going to talk, I think, more about what can be done, but one of the asks that MSF has of anyone interested in access to medicines is that you call your elected representatives and let them know that you care about access to medicine. MSF in the summer wrote a letter to President Obama and the heads of state of every other negotiating country, expressing our concerns and outlining the ways that access to medicines could be restricted in the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And we're asking you to do the same and let your members of Congress know as the negotiation is closing and losing time for this to be changed around. Ask your members of Congress to talk to the White House, talk to the USTR, and let them know that you don't agree with a trade agreement that would restrict access to medicines for millions of patients around the world. So that's it.
Thank you, Jennifer. Whenever I hear of healthcare issues and how companies are really putting their profits ahead of people's health, it just surprises me that someone could ethically do that and sleep at night and, enjoy their nice cars and their nice house. And I mean, the healthcare situation in this country, we've had so many problems, but we're still in a much better situation than a lot of the countries that you're working in. So it's really critical, the work that you guys do. So thank you. So our next and last speaker before questions and answers is Adam Weissman. He is the founder of Global Justice for Animals and the Environment, which works to oppose free trade agreements that endanger the environment, food safety, and animal welfare, and the human rights of environmental defenders. He represents Global Justice for Animals and the Environment in Trade Justice New York Metro, also known as Occupy Wall Street Trade Justice Working Group, a coalition of New York area organizations from diverse social movements united in opposition to NAFTA, WTO, and TPP. So thank you.
Okay, thanks everyone. So, when we think of TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, there's a lot of other useful things that TPP can stand for. One of them is the polluter's power grab. In the next few minutes, I'm going to be going over about 12 different ways that TPP is going to be used by corporations intent on profiting off the destruction of the environment to undermine the environmental rules that we have spent decades fighting for. Number one, procurement rules. So one of the ways that we can encourage production of green products and limit the environmental impact of our own government is through green purchasing rules, through rules that decide what our government buys, and things, for example, recycled content rules, good wood bills that restrict purchasing of wood products from endangered rainforests or other endangered forest ecosystems. TPP prohibits will potentially prohibit these kind of rules. We've seen the same thing in past trade agreements. Governor Pataki, in his eternal wisdom, committed New York with a side letter that said that New York would take these procurement rules negotiated in free trade agreements and apply them to New York state-level purchasing from every trade agreement subsequent to the Central America Free Trade Agreement. He did this without any legislative review or oversight, just unilateral decision on Governor Pataki's part, kind of what we should expect from him, I suppose. TPP will also, and this segues into the next point, potentially prohibit buy local rules. So rules that are encouraged to support local business, support our local farmers, support the development of local economies, will potentially be attacked by TPP. And that, from an environmental perspective, means that we are pushing in exactly the opposite direction at a time when we should be thinking about reducing our consumption of fossil fuels and buying closer to home. TPP forces us in exactly the opposite direction. It also breaks down some of the our ability to have a closer sense and oversight of how the things we buy are being made, building direct relationships with farmers, for example. Another aspect of that, by eliminating tariffs on imported products, TPP also disincentivizes local production and encourages corporations to outsource and offshore production to countries where they can produce more cheaply and export back to the U.S., further undermining the goal of producing closer to home and reducing the fuel miles that go into the products that we buy. As we heard about, TPP will include these NAFTA-style investor-state rules, the same kind of devastating rules that are right now being used by a mining company to sue, for example, to sue El Salvador for $170 million for having the audacity to not let this mining company mine for gold using toxic chemicals near the river that's the largest drinking water source in the country. The same rules that a U.S. investor is using in Peru to try to prevent the accountability for remediating one of the 10 most toxic sites in the world, this highly toxic smelter site. TPP will also encourage increased extraction of unsustainable energy resources. We already heard about fracking, but TPP will also encourage increased extraction of other fossil fuels in some of the world's most environmentally sensitive areas. We've already seen under the trade agreements like the U.S.-Peru Free Trade Agreement that the passage of the trade agreement led to increased land grabs on the lands of indigenous peoples. There was a massacre in Peru in 2009 as indigenous people rose up as the president tried to use the U.S.-Peru Free Trade Agreement to effectively confiscate indigenous people's lands on behalf of extractive industries and corporate agribusiness. With China waiting in the wings to potentially be a TPP country, which is a country that Peru does not currently have a trade agreement with. That's particularly disturbing, as well as many of the other countries in TPP that have highly environmentally sensitive areas and ecosystems that are under attack. One in particular, Malaysia, is having some second thoughts about TPP, and one of the things that's being used to sweeten the pot right now is talk about clearing the way for increased exports of palm oil. The extraction of palm oil is one of the major drivers of Southeast Asian rainforest destruction, wiping out habitat for orangutans, for the Malayan tiger and the pygmy elephant. TPP will also drive the elimination of, I already mentioned, the elimination of import tariffs, and one of the reasons that should concern us, aside from just the long-distance shipping issue I also mentioned, is that it gives corporations the incentive to ship production to countries with the lowest environmental standards. So one example of where that's already happened with devastating impacts. After the passage of NAFTA, Smithfield Foods, a notorious hog farming company, decided that they were sick of having to deal with U.S. environmental laws and having to pay fines for polluting here in the U.S. So they outsourced production to Mexico. They created a massive factory farm called Carroll Ranches in the much more lax Mexican regulatory climate. And pretty soon a lot of people got sick from this filthy factory farm where you can see pictures of hogs floating in waterways. And so a lot of people got sick, and disease spread without Mexico, and you can see pictures of people wearing masks, and a lot of people started dying, and that disease spread north of the border. And about 18,000 people died, and they called it swine flu. So the hog industry decided this was a very serious concern that they needed to do something about it immediately. So the critical agenda for the hog industry in addressing this problem was making sure that we started calling it H1N1 and not swine flu, because it was very bad for the PR. Another effect of outsourcing production in that matter is we see more and more production of mass-produced low-cost items, for example, low-cost electronics that are designed to be bought cheaply and break quickly, generating more e-waste. TPP, a leaked aspect of TPP reveals that TPP has a very scary regulatory coherence chapter that pushes a Reagan-esque cost-benefit analysis standard. So basically, our lives are going to be weighed against corporate profits, and they're going to figure out, how much our lives should be worth versus how much corporate profits should be worth. Built into TPP also, and what we've seen in past trade agreements with regard to things like food, are what are called SPS standards, sanitary and phytosanitary harmonization standards. Harmonization is one of those great newspeak words. What that basically means is flattening all the standards, generally at the level that satisfies the U.S., which pretty much means knocking down everyone else's food safety standards so that we can bring them down to the level that our corporations like. So that means Japan and New Zealand can say goodbye to their bans on genetically modified foods. It means that ractopamine, a livestock drug that's banned in 160 countries, but legal in the U.S., can be forced into other countries. Taiwan, which is not even part of TPP, has had its arm twisted to lift its ractopamine ban just so that it can be considered for inclusion in TPP down the line. This is a drug that's notorious for making animals sick, causing a lot of animal suffering, and passing all those good things on to those people who eat those animals. So TPP will also, on the flip side, increase imports of unsafe foods. Vietnam is notorious for its dirty shrimp farms. That a lot of the imported shrimp has been found to contain toxic levels of pesticides. TPP is going to lead to a flood of new toxic imports, but not an increase in regulators to actually manage the increased dangerous imports. Malaysia is known for transshipping Chinese shrimp, meaning taking in shrimp from China and then re-exporting it out to us. TPP will also drive the globalization of industrial agriculture, meaning that as we did under NAFTA with Mexico, to Mexico under NAFTA, we will wipe out family farms and sustainable agriculture, and by exporting to countries tariff-free, our genetically modified, industrially produced, factory-farmed, pesticide-sprayed, heavily mechanized, subsidized agricultural exports, driving out generations of sustainable family farm agriculture, destroying agricultural communities. This is such a big threat in Japan that the Japanese farmers mass mobilized even before Japan was part of TPP, just on the threat that TPP was becoming, because they've seen what trade agreements like this have already done to farming communities. And this should also scare us, because one thing we've seen as a result is as more and more countries have faced import pressure from factory farm exports, more and more countries have moved in the direction of factory farming, often without the regulatory standards or the infrastructure in place to clean up the enormous messes that creates. The World Health Organization has deep concerns about bird flu in Vietnam potentially expanding to epidemic levels. Yet we're going to put in place a trade agreement that's going to drive more and more industrialization of agriculture. TPP will also, as other trade agreements, have pushed the globalization of the unsustainable and unhealthy standard American diet, more and more people consuming animal products, driving climate change. TPP countries, Australia, U.S., and Vietnam are major producers of three of the biggest climate drivers on the planet: beef, sheep, and factory shrimp. Two other quick points before I wrap. TPP has raised deep concerns about exacerbating the trade of illegal wildlife by increasing trade standards, by lowering barriers to trade. and groups like Oceana have raised concerns that TPP will exacerbate overfishing. So in conclusion, if we want to protect the environment, we have to stop TPP, or everything that we've done over decades to fight for a cleaner environment will be undermined. Thanks.
Thank you, Adam. I think it was important we started off about the environment and we ended with the environment. I mean, food is something that we need. There's no way around it. And to think that our own food sources are so at risk from this, it's very scary. So now what we're going to do is we're going to open up to questions for a little while. She's here? No. Oh, no, we're going to do that to questions. So Keith Frederick was supposed to be a speaker as well. And
trouble what to say. First of all, my name is Jay Blackman. I'm with MoveOn.org. And one of the things I can't understand is that a lot of us sitting here have worked very hard in the previous years to get President Obama elected. And we thought he was on our side against the corporations, and now it seems like a Darth Vader kind of thing, where he's gone to the dark side. Well, nobody told me about that. Yeah, well, is there an explanation from anybody up there as to what's going on? I mean, he doesn't have to worry about another election to get corporate funding of any sort.
Well, now that's a very good question. And I think, really, because I know other forms of that question, people have asked, well, why would the governments give away all their power to the corporations? And I think the answers to these questions are, well, who controls the government? Who is the dominant powers in society? And that's how we have to look at it. Government is not some abstract entity that hovers above society. It's an organic part of it. And in a country like the United States, or in any capitalist country, the corporations and the financiers and the industrialists, the people with the most money and therefore the most power, they're the ones who are going to get to bend the governments to do their bidding and do their will. I think Obama, after the adventures of Bush II, Obama was seen by a lot of his wealthy supporters as the cool, calm hand at the helm of empire, and not to have so many adventures as we did with Bush and Cheney. And I think they got what they fought for.
So yeah, $1 billion in an election can buy you a lot of loyalty from an elected official. President Obama, for those of us doing trade justice work, the positions that President Obama ended up taking in office, frankly, weren't surprising. In 2007, while in the early days of campaigning, President Obama came out in support, along with Hillary Clinton, of the U.S.-Peru Free Trade Agreement, an agreement that people in the environmental movement were warning would have devastating impacts on the Amazon rainforest and other endangered ecosystems, would lead to disastrous humanitarian impacts, which we've seen in the massacre I mentioned before, as well as another massacre of farmers in 2008. The labor movement was warning that it would undermine progress for labor, so President Obama clearly wasn't too worried. On the campaign trail in 2008, when he thought it would matter for winning the primaries, he campaigned against Hillary Clinton, castigating her for basically for her husband pushing NAFTA. At the same time, it was leaked that his advisors were one of his advisors was up in Canada, warning the Canadian government that this was just basically, rhetoric to win primaries and they shouldn't worry about it. And immediately after the close of the primary, or very shortly after the close of the primaries, he was interviewed and referring to his comments about NAFTA during the primary, in which he made very strong statements about how we need a model of trade that protects the environment and protects labor. And he committed to either renegotiate NAFTA or pull the U.S. out of NAFTA. Direct quote, he referred to these words as overheated campaign rhetoric. So basically he would say, I didn't mean any of that stuff, I just needed to fool the Democrats to win the primary. So this is the game Obama's been playing all along. In 2011, he passed trade agreements that he pledged that he would oppose, a trade agreement with Colombia that he described as unconscionable because of the murder of labor, as we heard about the murder of labor organizers. Only one of the atrocities in Colombia, by the way, the highest rate of internal displacement on the planet, with over 5 million people internally displaced, murder of indigenous people, murder of Afro-Colombian communities, just absolute human rights atrocities ongoing in this country. He passed a trade agreement with Korea that he pledged to oppose, that the 147,000 U.S. jobs were supposedly going to be, over 147,000 jobs were going to be put at risk according to the U.S. International Trade Commission. He passed a trade agreement with Panama that is going to help the banksters and the 1% hide their money in overseas bank accounts. So pretty much this is what we've been seeing from him throughout his entire presidency.
Anybody else like to answer that question? So just to close it up, I mean, it really also comes down to campaign financing and Citizens United, and getting rid of Citizens United in New York State. You know, we're pushing really hard to pass fair elections, publicly financed elections. You know, we have to get corporations out of the electoral system. I mean, their money counts a lot more than our votes, so we need to change that balance. So that's another action piece that we should be doing. Next question, please.
I'm Leonard Lehrman, member of Move On. I'm also a member of the Green Party for many of the reasons that you just elicited about the Democrats. But I want to talk to you about the Democrats, particularly my Harvard upstairs Nick Al Gore. I remember that he demolished Ross Perot in a debate about NAFTA. And it seemed at the time that the liberal left was supporting the demise of Glass-Steagall and the rise of NAFTA. Now, at least Glass-Steagall at this point is no longer so favored, as we see by the withdrawal of Larry Summers, who was in charge of repealing that law. And I think enough pressure on the left came so that he sensibly did withdraw his name from the appointment that he seemed destined to have. Is there any hope of the left at this time doing the same pressure about Glass-Steagall on NAFTA? I mean, I think everybody out there feels that TPP is just the tip of the iceberg at this point. It's really NAFTA that has to go. Or as Westpac says, NAFTA, we don't have to. Right?
Would anybody like to address that question?
Well, I think NAFTA is certainly here, and its negative impacts will still be felt. This is a way of bringing more countries into the whole regime, as they call it. I mean, it's a way of bringing those who haven't been signed on to some other kind of a bilateral trade agreement into this larger worldwide system, even if they're off the Pacific Rim. So I think it's just equally dangerous, and I think just to give an explanation of it, I hope nobody goes home terribly depressed, but it is very depressing. And it has a lot to do with Citizens United. It has a lot to do with the American Legislative Exchange Council, and we're losing ground as we lose the ability through redistricting to win our legislatures back. We lose the ability to elect people, and then we lose the ability to stop what's going on. This war is going on in this country, this war on workers, where we're, in Michigan, Wisconsin, Indiana, right to work, repealing their ability to collect dues and essentially weakening the labor movement. I'd like to have something more hopeful, but I think that it really is a call to action to people and which we'll get into, that from the very grassroots, and that's what this is. This is really very important.
I'll just add, I think the question in part was like, can the left win? Like, can we actually do it this time? And I think, it's a heavy lift, right? And as everybody just went over, Obama's obviously been horrific on trade policy and on so many other issues. But I don't think we should fool ourselves that it's about Obama, right? I mean, it's Democrats in general. I mean, and we've we've talked a lot about NAFTA, which is obviously the Clinton administration. It's going to take a long time. I mean, there was a serious shift really before that with Reagan, right? And then a lot of the Democrats adopted a lot of those ideas. And it takes a long time to fight against that. The right took a long time building it up, and they did it by winning dog catcher and local town boards and school council seats. And like, honestly, I think that's what the left has to do, and it's going to take an awfully long time. But the other more immediate thing I think that's really hopeful is I think there's an increasing willingness to hold Democrats accountable and to kind of get out of this cycle that democracy is something that happens every 2 or 4 years. And a lot of folks go out to the polls and like help knock on doors, and all that stuff is fantastic, and we should all do it. Or if you want to do it, you should do it. But what's important is it doesn't stop there, right? Like, it's not just that you have to get the person you want into office, you then have to hold him or her accountable. And I think we're seeing that a little bit around Obama on TPP. We're seeing it on other issues like Keystone. We're beginning to see it on more and more issues. And I think that's very encouraging and something the left, at least to me, hasn't done a great job of. And so I think we're beginning to do better at that.
Can I? This right there. You want? You think that's it? I'm sorry. My allergies. Okay. So you want to go wait online? There's people back there. Oh, I'm sorry. No. That's okay. Next one.
Hi, my name is Bob Marcus. Thank you all. I think we've heard some really helpful information about how TPP would be very damaging to our environment, to the availability of medication and the pricing, to shipping jobs overseas, how serious that would be. And at the same time, I think the implication was it would suppress wages at home, food safety, etc. It seems to me that, you know, an overriding factor here is that TPP really weakens our democracy and just seems to be giving corporations that much more control of our government and our lives. And so I'm wondering if any of you could please just tell us a bit about the fast-track procedure, which I think contributes to that, and also the implications of TPP regarding Internet privacy. Thank you.
So we were going to have a discussion of the fast track, because that's actually part of the action piece, right? Because our action is to stop fast track. So what we're going to do is we're going to take the last 4 people who are standing up. We're going to try to shorten our remarks so we can move on to that next part of the section, and then we will address that question.
Okay, how about the Internet? Are people familiar with how it would affect people's use of the Internet?
Okay. A couple good sources of information on this issue. The Electronic Frontier Foundation has done important work on this issue. Public Knowledge and Knowledge Ecology, I think, are 2 other organizations. The Internet aspect of TPP is pretty crazy, to say the least. It pretty much turns your ISP into a cop that's supposed to watch how well you're respecting corporate intellectual property. So the example that people use a lot is, let's say you download a recipe, you copy a recipe off the internet, you buy a recipe off the internet, and then you decide to email it to your mom and 2 cousins. Well, you've now violated corporate intellectual property, and you can be held liable for that and it's your ISP's job to keep track of if you're doing that. If your computer makes a buffer copy of a file, which can be an automated process, and it's a copyrighted file, you can be held liable for that. So it's a tremendous attack on privacy. It's an attack on the ACLU, because of this aspect of TPP, has described TPP as the biggest threat to free speech that you've never heard of. There's a website, I think it's tppinfo.org, I think it's .org. There's another site, stopthetrap.net. So there's a bunch of good sites out there with information on that issue. If you go to one good index for them, if you go to tradejustice.net/TPP, all lowercase, there's a link there on TPP and the internet. So yeah, the internet aspects of TPP are pretty terrifying.
Thank you. Next question.
Hi, my name is Anne Marie Anso. I'm a member of the Green Sanctuary Committee here at the Unitarian Congregation, and I'm a member of Food and Water Watch. I want to thank you all for your presentations. The more I hear about it, the more frightening it is. And as an animal activist, I'm very concerned. I know we didn't touch much upon that tonight, but like the recent EU ban on the seal fur from Canada. So far they've been winning that, and Canada has brought it to the World Trade Organization, I think twice, to try to sue the European Union, and so far it's held the ban. How will that affect it? Can they go back and just undo that? And also, as activists, I mean, we've already been labeled as terrorists, and it's been very restrictive. How will the TPP, if any, will it restrict our further, participation in activism against the corporations?
Okay, I think, of course, Canada and Mexico are in the TPP, so this is going to supersede NAFTA. And in regards to the European Union isn't directly involved in this, but there's now a parallel. There's the TTIP, which is the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, is exactly the same thing, and this is between the United States and the European Union, and Canada is also quietly in similar negotiations with the European Union. My thought is that very likely Canada will just fold itself into that. So the kind of stuff that we're talking about then would apply to Europe, and I would think those I don't have direct knowledge of that, but I would suspect those kinds of regulations on the on the seal trade would be under very much threat from that.
Yeah, taking the questions in reverse order. With regard to the terrorism question, I'll just say that we have seen intense repression of activists fighting against corporate globalization for a long time. In the fight against the U.S.-South Korea Free Trade Agreement, protesters were shot with water cannons, which it sounds like a hose. It's serious. It can break bones, it can cause permanent blindness. There's a film on the entire model of policing that was developed to really undermine mass protests against globalization in regard to the fight against the free trade area of the Americas that you can check out online. It's called the Miami model. We can see certainly, as the resistance increases, we can certainly expect to see increased repression. With regard to the animal question, I think the WTO case the seal case is ongoing. The WTO, by the way, just ruled recently that the U.S. dolphin-safe tuna label is illegal. So we've seen case after case where wildlife and animal protection rules have been undermined by the WTO. The added piece with the EU agreement that Pete was talking about, you can expect potentially to see things like the European Union's recent ban on animal-tested products challenged by U.S. corporations who are seeing a threat to their exports. So absolutely, there's good reason for animal groups to be concerned about TPP and the EU agreements. Groups like PETA, for example, mentioned that they were very concerned about the fact that Australia is a major, they're one of the world's largest producers of sheep, and there's some very inhumane practices in the Australia. There's a practice called museling, a very gruesome practice called museling in the Australian sheep industry. I'll spare you the description of it. It's ugly, but that Australia has backed out on commitments to further regulate this practice. So definitely an area of concern.
Thank you. Next question, John.
Presently, I'm the co-organizer of Long and Move On. We're beginning to change on that. My question, basically, it might go on comment. My thinking is this analogy. First of all, is that basically the countries involved with these trade agreements are prostitutes, and prostitutes, and basically the multinational corporations are the pimps. What I just is, this may be an action thing, I just want to know how much time do we have to try to go and prevent this? They go fast track. How fast is this track going?
We are going to get on a fast track section. action, but I think if you do have a timeline, if you feel like there's a timeline for action after we stop fast track, right, it is kind of up in the air when we kind of know.
I know we're about to talk about it, so I'll just say quickly, I think if we can kill it, if you can stop fast track like in 2013 or maybe in the next 6 months, then you buy yourself some time, right? Because this is incredibly unpopular in a whole bunch of districts, both Republican and Democrat. No one wants to do it before the 2014 election. So really the key time is now, right? Like you have to stop it in the short term, and then that gets you at least through the next election, and then you've got a little bit more time to build. So that's like the super short time frame, I think.
Right. Yeah.
And specifically, the U.S. Trade Representative said in 2012, without fast track, TPP probably won't. The negotiations won't conclude.
Yes.
So thank you. We will get back into just a minute after the last two questions.
Hi, my name is Joe Loria. I'm the Queens County Coordinator of Move On, and I just want to make a couple of comments. A few months ago, I didn't know what TPP was, and someone said, oh, it's very important, you have to look it up, and I did, and I was just amazed. And I was very amazed that no one knows what it is. And then it became very much clearer when you realize that 90% of the news media is controlled by 6 corporations.
5.
And I learned a lot. And what I did learn that there's 600 corporate representatives putting this thing together, that no U.S. representatives had anything to do with it in terms of U.S. Congress people or senators. And basically it's a wish list of, and the other thing is, it's not the countries. It's the richest people in the countries, the wealthiest people in the world who have put together a wish list of what would it look like if we had no barriers to trade, no environmental laws, no labor laws, no health laws. And that's their wish list. And then they come and say, well, look, you got to push this thing through. You can't let your Congress people see this because they just don't understand. It's too technical. Leave it to us, all right? And so with the fast track, some things I hear that it's possible it could come up within a matter of weeks that they may have a fast track vote in Congress. And by the way, it doesn't only cover the TPP, it covers the European agreement as the one fast track.
And this is with Obama's consent?
Yes, it's with Obama's consent.
Mission and expertise.
Yes. And so I realize it's the richest people in the world, and every trade agreement is an exploitation of the poorest people in the community. So what they're basically doing is looking where the labor is the cheapest, where people can set up factories, exploit the locals, and sell products cheaply. The latest place that they're looking at is Vietnam. Labor is 27 cents an hour. And I took the liberty, we hear there's a trade deficit in the United States, and it's mentioned once in a while, gee, we got to stop that. Well, I added it up. There was a separate trade agreement with China signed in 2000. From that point on, the trade deficit with China just skyrocketed year to year to year to year. I added up 10 years, I think it's 12 years, and it came out to $2.7 trillion that went out of this country, never to return. The other countries collectively, taken collectively, about equal that. So it comes out to $5.4 trillion. Our whole deficit is 16-point-something trillion. That they're all concerned the country's going downhill. Well, these deficits are continuing. There's no way to get our manufacturing back. We need to keep buying our products from China now.
So I'm going to have to ask you to stop right there. And what you're actually doing right now is exactly going to be an action plan. And that's going to people and simplifying what this is to your friends and neighbors. So if you have a question, we'd love to take it because we want to wrap up this section. But if not, we're going to tell you how you can really use the stuff that you just talked about in the action plan.
Okay, I just wanted to share that. Thank you.
Thank you. Last question.
My name is Bob Nuxel. I'm from this congregation. And due to a little bit of history, I have to add to that. I'm speaking as an individual and not as a representative of this organization. I've had enough trouble over that. My background is teaching history and economics. And I see a lesson of history that I would like to ask, especially Mr. Clayman and Mr. Dover, they would comment on. In history, when areas tried to get rid of malaria, they tried swatting the individual mosquitoes. It did no good. They tried sparse use of insecticides. Did very little good. And then finally they realized it's time to drain the swamp. I'm not a socialist, but I believe in a mixed economy. I believe there has to be some socialist protections for the entire population. And my question is this. It's a larger one. It's pulling in what I heard almost all of you say in part. Don't you think after we get finished with this initial fight, we have to take on the question of, are the people truly represented in the decision process of this country? Why are these commissions being set up, international commissions, with no representations of the teachers, the unions, the environmentalists? We look at one country that is far from perfect, but you look, again, this is a history teacher looking at it, I'm looking at modern Germany. And they brought the workers in. They're sitting on the boards. And most of these problems that we're running into here, they're not running into. Do you think, especially the two gentlemen I mentioned, that we have to stand up, and when people say mixed economy, we've got to stand up when they start screaming socialist back at them. The time has come for the rest of the people to be represented in these commissions and in the government.
Amen. Okay, in regards to Germany, two things. One, that the so-called German economic miracle is on the backs of the Mediterranean countries and the EU rim countries. And two, it's not a German-wide prosperity, it's the prosperity of German manufacturers on the backs of German workers. Okay, so let's understand that. There's a little fuller picture of Germany going on there. Basically what happened is austerity was applied in Germany 10 years ago by the Social Democrats, incidentally, who've been out of office ever since. Hearts is the name of it. Anyway, without getting into too many details. What it is basically the Social Democrats made a deal with the German trade unions, and it says, okay, we'll keep manufacturing in Germany if you'll agree to damp down and agree to no more increases in wages. So German workers have taken a steady decrease in wages when you adjust for inflation over the past 10 years. Now, Germany is heading for difficulties because they're becoming more and more dependent on exports, i.e. exports to countries like Greece and India and Italy that are in their own difficulties. Also, they send a lot of producer goods, i.e. manufactured equipment to China, and at some point China is just making too many investments there. So there's all kinds of contradictions and instabilities around there. Don't look at Germany as any kind of model. It's really not. Germany is heading to its own difficulties. And to get back to our penultimate speaker, the problem with China, it's not China that's taking jobs away. Okay? It's U.S. multinational corporations that are taking jobs away. Okay, Chinese workers are brutally exploited, and incidentally, Vietnam is the low-cost wage alternative to China. There's already manufacturers in China that are now exporting their jobs to Bangladesh and Vietnam, where their wages are even lower. Who is the number one responsible entity for jobs being sucked out of the United States and going to China? Walmart. Okay, if anybody shops at Walmart, you are helping this process of sucking American jobs out of the United States and onto China. Apple, and look, I own a Mac, so I'm guilty too. But that's who gets it. Those profits don't go to China; they go back to the coffers of Apple and Walmart. if anyone ever looks at the fortune, I'll just be one more sec here because I know I'm giving a longer answer than I should. If you look at the Forbes list of the richest people, 4 of the top 17 richest people in the world are wealth families. Not collectively, each individually. 4 out of the 17. Now, where is all that money coming from? It's because they shipped all the jobs to China, and then they're the ones who make the profits. They squeeze all of it. If you produce for Walmart, you have to ship your production to China because you cannot afford Walmart to sell because what they pay you is so low. It's so low. So you got to look at the larger big picture. This is capitalism. It's not China. It's not this country. It's not that country. This is capitalism in action. This is the natural result of when you let market forces make all decisions. That's what's happening here.
The question about Europe, about Germany, there's a kind of, logically it would seem that we would be ideal trading partners. High wage, relatively, not like the developing world, but it could end up being absolutely no different. And there are signs of it already, unless we develop a different kind of rules for trading other than the direction we're going, because if we're going with a TPP set of rules between ourselves and Europe, the outcome should be very similar. Just one quick response to the other issue you raised. Is there another way? I think at the AFL-CIO convention, there were some Brazilian trade unionists there who described the situation that they have created for themselves under Lula. And while we practiced austerity economics after 2008, they practiced a different kind of economics, which is more demand-driven and recognizing the need for social services and investment and workers' rights, not completely, but much more so, and the impacts of the recession were far less on the negative side there. So is there another way? Yes, there's another way. It takes a lot of small steps, but that's a government that found another way to do it.
Thank you. If you could speak really quick.
Yeah, it's very appropriate that the conversation is now swinging to Bangladesh and China, because one of the things we need to be most concerned about with TPP, and one of the most blatant ways that TPP attacks democracy, is that it is intended as a docking agreement, meaning that after TPP is ratified by Congress, any new country can be brought into TPP with Congress having not a word of say in it. So, the next day, China could be brought into TPP. The day after that, Bangladesh could be brought into TPP. The day after that, India could be brought into TPP. The day after that, the Philippines. And the day after that, Thailand. And the day after that, Indonesia. And all these countries have been talked about as being added to TPP. Which means that any hope that we have of actually having some say over what countries we're in trade agreements with, based on their human rights records, or based on their environmental records, or based on anything else, is out the window if TPP goes into effect. And by the way, companies like Walmart are some of the biggest pushers of TPP. If you want to find out which companies are pushing this, go to occupys17.info, and there's a link there to TPP corporate targets, and you'll find out which corporations like Walmart and Apple and others have been pushing this agreement.
Thank you.
occupys17.info.
It's not on that URL. That's a different URL. It's occupys17, like the letter S, 17.info, I-N-F-O, not .com or .org, .info. And then there's a link, TPP corporate targets, and you'll see a link there for U.S. Business Coalition for TPP. And then there's also a list of the 605 advisors to the TPP, mostly corporate advisors, who are pushing for these kinds of rules that attack access to medicines and attack environmental laws, etc.
Thank you. So Kian Frederick from Citizens Trade Campaign was supposed to be a speaker tonight. She's been really organizing the local coalition, getting Move On, Long Island Progressive Coalition, unions, to really, do what we need to stop this thing. So unfortunately, she couldn't be here. We're going to have Dan Fingus from the Long Island Progressive Coalition fill in for her, tell you what's going on with Fast Track and what you should be doing. And so Dan works with the Long Island Progressive Coalition. We are a social, economic, and racial justice organization. We work on many issues from affordable housing to green energy, helping people green their homes and provide good jobs for workers, and helping the environment, and public education, making sure the poor school districts get funding so that they can succeed and provide a quality education. Dan's new to LIPC. He is coming from a union background, worked with LIUNA, the laborers union, and SEIU as well in the past. So, welcome, Dan.
Should also be noted briefly, Koch brothers bought an Apple supplier recently.
All right, so we've just heard environmentally, labor-wise, medical access issues, very complicated issues. As the timer over there, I had to cut off every single one of these speakers before their time was up because these issues are so complicated. There's so much to it. So the response of the administration to the complication of the issue is to fast-track it, right? Let's make it quicker. Let's make this happen more in secret. Let's take away our congressional authority to review, debate, amend, the public process so the public can actually know what's going on. That's fast track. It's also known as the Trade Promotions Authority. Now, fast tracks have happened since the Nixon era. They've happened many different times. Most recently, President Bush II in 2002 passed the Trade Promotions Authority. That went for 5 years. And that barely passed 2 votes in the U.S. Congress. But we haven't had a fast-track authority available to the administration since 2007. So President Obama has not had at any time fast-track authority, but he wants one now. And if it is passed in what we think will be the next couple of weeks, October is what we're hearing, I think everyone here is agreed on that, then not only would TPP be able to pass without a congressional debate, without committee hearings, but with just people go in a room off somewhere in the Pacific and decide what's going to happen, then come back and there's a straight up or down vote. That's what's going to happen. So I will go over the few major elements that fast track would do. It circumvents congressional authority in a few different ways. It gives the executive branch the power to select trading partners, set the terms of trade agreements, sign the agreements before Congress votes on them, write implementing legislation, circumvent congressional committee review, and submit legislation directly to a vote. Also the power to override congressional leaders' control of House and Senate floor schedules, and the power to override normal voting procedures. So pretty much, other than the fact that our representatives are still going to be able to vote for the trade agreement at the end of the day with the yes or no vote, takes away almost all the other powers of Congress. So we don't want that. I hope everyone agrees after all of this talk that we don't want that. And the way we make sure that Congress still has all their powers is by making sure fast track doesn't happen. Now, fortunately here in Long Island we have 3 Congress people, right? Bishop, Israel, and McCarthy, who have all signed a letter saying, don't pass the fast track. They're all on our side. But they're all on our side in a letter to the president, and the fight's not over yet. So we need more from our congressional people. First thing, we need some public op-eds from our elected officials saying, TPP is bad, fast track is bad. Specifically, fast track is bad. Let's have an open dialogue, let's have an open debate. So that's the first thing we need. The second thing we need is for all constituents to call their congressperson and say, TPP is bad, fast track is bad. I've got the numbers here, I've got flyers I can hand out here in a minute that give you the information, where to call, that kind of stuff. But we need to bolster and support our congresspeople. Because our congresspeople have already said they're with us on this, but we don't want them to get their arms twisted. We don't want Congressman Israel to get his arm twisted by Obama and change his mind, right? And the third thing we need to do is, the church here at Shelter Rock have done this wonderful forum. We've had these great speakers. You guys all know way more about TPP than almost anyone else probably on Long Island. The problem is, it's 50 of us, right? We need to have more forums, we need to have more events, we need to get more people involved, we need to get more people knowing what these issues are so they can be as outraged as we are, and so they can also act, call their congressperson, bolster their congresspeople. So those are the 3 things. Let's get our congresspeople, let's talk to them, bolster them, let's get op-eds from our congresspeople and elected officials, and let's hold more forums and get this to be more public.
Where does Meeks stand, you know?
That's a good question. I was going to ask Claire DeRose, right? Weren't you meeting with Meeks?
No, I met with Grace Mann. I'm in her district, but I don't know where it is.
Okay,
We had a meeting scheduled with Meeks for Wednesday. It's supposed to be this morning, but they were called back to Washington.
Has he signed the letter?
So Gregory Meeks Okay, yeah. Gregory Meeks has just about the worst trade voting record of any Democrat in the United States of America. He was one of only 15 Democrats in the country who voted for the U.S. Central America Free Trade Agreement. He's voted for every free trade agreement since, without exception. He's a board member of a bunch of the big corporate organizations pushing these trade agreements. I've personally talked to him on how he intends to vote on fast track. In off the cuff, one-on-one conversation, he's said that he would consider voting against fast track. I don't know. I wouldn't put much stock in that comment. But he is a very tough nut to crack. There is no one in the Democratic Party in the state of New York, possibly in the country, who has been more a thorn in the side of the trade justice movement than Gregory Meeks. He was very closely tied with the Colombian government, very aggressively worked to push the trade agreement with Colombia against the labor movement. So, we need to work on him, but I wouldn't suggest anyone get their hopes up too high on him.
Yeah, so the meeting, the outreach, he has a sliver of Long Island now. It's a new part of his district. It's important for us to make sure he signs this letter. There's a flyer that Dan's bringing around which has the actions and has the details on it. Did you want to say something?
By the way, action does work. We have with us tonight a representative from Steve Israel's office, an outreach director was sent. We had talked, a bunch of us had a teleconference with from Long Island Move On, and we were able to get someone in Washington. We sent him some papers, and Representative Israel did sign on to the Laurel letter, and he sent someone here tonight. So you must make those phone calls and say no TP, no fast track, and tell your friends about it now, too. And tell them to download the tape that's being made and look at public access TV for more information. Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you, everyone, for coming. Thank you, the panelists. You guys were great.
Refreshments are in the art gallery. My husband.
If anyone is in Peter King's district and has questions, I'm happy to talk to you one-on-one.
Okay, folks, so we're here. I'm in Manhasset right now, actually. I'm in the Unitarian Virtual Church. We just had a panel on the TPP, Trans-Pacific Partnership. Trans-Pacific Partnership. You can check out on democracynow.org, and they did a report on it a while ago. Just do a search for Democracy Now. DemocracyNow.org, and they did a report on it on the portion of TPP that was leaked. How to an agreement that's this secret? How does this panel know so much about it? It's because there were parts of the agreement that were leaked, not the entire thing, not by any stretch the entire thing. However, there were parts of the agreement that were leaked. As a result of this, we know that the Trans-Pacific Partnership will be devastating to the middle class, be devastating to pretty much anyone who's not rich. And just to say that simply, there's a lot more I could say here, but in the end, just look back at my last video in the archive. You can look back there and you can find everything. And that's I'm just regurgitating what they're saying. In the last video, the people on the panel were very informed, very knowledgeable on the subject. Check it out, please. The last video in my archive. Google Trans-Pacific Partnership, TPP. And the other one they mentioned was Transatlantic. I can't remember. Either way. You can also go to occupys17.info, occupys17.info, and find the corporations who support Trans-Pacific Partnership. Walmart, Monsanto, Halliburton, I'm sure they all do. occupys17.info. Follow me on Twitter at StopMotionSolo. My fan page is facebook.com/StopMotionSolo. My blog is stopmotionsolo.net, and you're watching here at stopmotionsolo.tv. In the channel info section, it says donate now. A small $2 contribution is all I'd ask for. to help sustain what I do. $2, nothing more. It's not much for you. It accumulates a lot for me in the end. Please help out. In the channel info section, it says donate now. $2 to stopmotionsolo@gmail.com. PayPal donation. You can also go to wepay.com/donations/stopmotionsolo. wepay.com/donations/stopmotionsolo. Finally, the way to sort of Jimmy wrench the Trans-Pacific Partnership is not necessarily, at the moment anyway, by going against Trans-Pacific Partnership. It is by getting your congressman to vote no on fast track. Simply put, what fast track will do is it gives I think there's been 11 years, so to speak, of secret negotiations on this thing. And there are 16 countries involved. Pretty much every country bordering the Pacific Rim will be involved in this pact. The issue here is, with fast track, it's congressional representatives, if they vote yes on fast track, then they will only have 90 days, I think, to look at the bill and then vote yes or no on it. When they vote yes or no, they cannot change any of the contents of the bill. They cannot edit any of the language, any of the punctuation at all whatsoever. They can just vote yes or no on it. From what I understand, and what my friend Adam has told me, the gentleman on the panel, when deals are passed through fast track, they usually go through. NAFTA was passed through fast track, and it caused American jobs to leave the country, and it destroyed the Mexican economy, and caused the influx of immigration, which caused loss of jobs here, and you know the story. Telling your congressman to vote no on fast track it's kind of like sending a Jimmy wrench in it, because if they vote no on fast track, then the congressman can edit language to fit their own constituents if they want to. In doing so, once they edit it, then all of that the new edit will then have to be okayed by every other country involved in TPP, Trans-Pacific Partnership. Every other country involved, and you have to get every other country to go along with it. Then, after 11 years roughly of negotiations on this thing, try getting them to okay new things which have already been too close and hard to get done in the first place. Thanks for watching very much. Google Stop Motion Solo. Donate if you can in the channel info section. It says donate now. $2. Again, that's all I ask for. $2, please. If you're watching on another stream, support them as well, because indie media is very important. Stay informed, get involved, be active, and stop the TPP, and stop fast track. The clock is ticking, folks.